You're listening to the 95 Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 95 Podcast. My name is Carolee Culpepper, and I am here with our Executive Director, Dale Sellers. How is it going today, Dale? You've had an exciting week, I hear.
Man, it's just, there's so many incredible things happening right now at 95 Network, and some of the dreams, some of the things I've dreamed of happening are beginning to come true. And I don't want to reveal a lot of those things yet till they're finalized, but just the opportunity to really help a lot of churches.
Going to keep everybody waiting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really cool. And had a great lunch yesterday with a pastor that we're going to actually have a podcast with, who was in the military for many years. And I was talking about me working through trauma. And at some point he said something about hanging out with a psychiatrist. I'm going, you go to psychiatrist? He said, every week, dude. He said, I got PTSD really bad. And he started out, and I'm going, that's going to be a powerful podcast that we're going to do down the road with him as we talk about trauma. But you know, we're going to continue to focus on mental health and try to make sure our pastors understand that, you know, a healthy pastor can create a healthy church, but definitely an unhealthy pastor is going to create an unhealthy church. And so we want you to be healthy first. And we also want to resource you as you listen to the podcast with, we always try to bring on guests who understand the plight of the small church and have are a great resource for them. And so today's guest is certainly someone like that. And how we met is pretty hilarious.
Gosh.
And then the fact that we actually lived in the same town all these years and didn't really know each other is even more funny. So anyway, Alan, we have Alan White with us today. Alan is a nationally known leader in the arena of small groups. He's a podcaster, a blogger, has a lot of information. And we got connected through basically his blog because one of the guys on the 95 Network team made a comment to Alan, and Alan responded to it. So Alan, welcome to the 95.
Well, how about that?
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So take a few minutes and let us all know who Alan White is, a little bit about your story, and then we're going to dive into some specifics this afternoon with you.
Sure. So I grew up in Kansas. I came to Christ when I was 7 years old, which means I just turned 57. It means I've been a Christian for 50 years this year.
I was saved when I was 7 too.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Well, 7 must be the age.
I was saved in one of those churches that, you had to be sure, you had to be really sure, and you had to be really, really sure. So I probably went to the altar like 100 times. So I just counted one of those as the time,
That's so funny.
So I grew up in Kansas, went to school, went to Bible College Seminary in Missouri, and then ended up in a church in Northern California. And so the church in Northern California, I was hired by the founding pastor. It was about 300 adults on the weekend. About a year and a half in, some things were found out. He had to resign. We lost all of the people that were in favor of the pastor. We lost all of the people who were against the pastor. And all of the staff left except for me. I tried to leave, but God wouldn't release me. So it was me and 85 people is all we had left. And our new senior pastor came in. At the time, he was 30, I was 28. We looked at our 85 people and just shook our heads and thought, what are we going to do? And so he took me to this conference, this guy I had never heard of back in 1993, this guy I had never heard of named Rick Warren. And learned about the purpose-driven church, which is kind of funny now that there was a time in my life I didn't know who Rick Warren was. And, it put a lot together for us as we went back and looked at our 85 people and we thought, how in the world? And we started building that a piece at a time. And we didn't grow dramatically. We grew by about maybe 100 a year. I left after 15 years of being there, and we were about 1,500. Dave has actually been the senior pastor there now 30 years this year. And they're about 3,500 on the weekend. Wow. So I left that church after 15 years. Actually, before I left, I started working for a national ministry called Life Together, which Brett Eastman had started out of Saddleback Church, and was working full-time for Life Together, full-time for my church, and something had to give. So went to work, moved to Orange County. We're members at Saddleback, which is not, doesn't have connections to a smaller church audience, but we'll get there. It gets worse before it gets better, if that helps.
Uh-oh.
So then left Southern California, moved across the country to Simpsonville, South Carolina, right outside of Greenville, and was the discipleship pastor at a church of 6,500 called Brookwood. And then I've been back into consulting full time for about 10, 11 years now. But I've worked at smallest church I've worked with is 40 people, largest church I've worked with is 40,000, and kind of everybody in between. So That's kind of the short of my story. But it's been an interesting journey.
Well, it's really cool how we met because you had written a blog recently, and Dennis Keith, who is on our team, had just made a comment to you about your blog, and he mentioned in there that he worked at 95 Network, and so this company that's there in that area reached out to me last week because they've got some things they want to work with us on, and the guy's going, this guy's just like going off about helping churches and working with small churches, and we're talking, and I finally got him to calm down enough. I said, dude, how did you find us? He said, you're on Alan White's blog. I'm going, I'm on Alan White's blog. And so because Dennis had mentioned that, and I reached out to you, and then I was like, you know what, this guy, he's a guru in the arena of the small groups. And obviously, that's been something that churches have struggled with, in some cases getting implemented for 30 years. And then some churches, they built their whole church around it. You got, I think it's Bethany over in Louisiana, everything's about small groups. And so kind of dive in a little bit about what you do, and specifically, the focal point of small groups, and what you found that really works as far as getting a church to get it going and keep it going.
Yeah, and I'm going to back up just for a second because Dennis and I go back several years.
Really?
He was in a coaching group that I did when he was on staff at his last church in Massachusetts.
Okay.
And then we've connected in several other ways. I think a lot of Dennis. He's got a lot.
Great brother, man. He's brought so much to the team for us.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, he's finishing up. He's doing his dissertation for his doctorate this spring, and once he wraps it up, he's got a lot of things he's going to bring to the table for us. And so, and it's really bizarre because you lived in Greenville. Didn't you say 14 years for Simpsonville?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I live in Simpsonville, and I told you when we were when I contacted you that I'm sure that we've been at the same events together, but it's just really funny that it took you moving to Kansas for me to find you.
Yeah, well, I'm just happy to hear somebody reads my blog, so that's heartening.
That's encouraging. That's encouraging.
Thank goodness. No, we were leaving Greenville, and people said, "Why would you ever want to leave South Carolina?" And I told them, I said, we love South Carolina, but I'll be honest, it's getting to be too many Yankees for us. So we're going to. That's not the reason. That's not the reason.
And thank you, 60 Minutes, for doing a whole special about it the other day. It's like, come on,
gosh.
guys.
They did what?
Greenville's a great town.
Yeah, it is. Yes, 60 Minutes did a whole special about it. But anyway, tell us about the focal point, man.
What are we doing? Small groups. Okay, so Jesus said to go and make small groups. He did not. Jesus said to go and make disciples. And so there are a lot of reasons to have small groups. And, for some cases, it's, how do you get people connected? Now, if you're in a smaller church, you don't say small groups, you just say groups, because it's already small. But, we need each other to grow. We need teaching, and that's part of it, but we also need community in order to grow. And I won't go too deep in that, but, what research tells us, research going back 30 years, is that people in groups, they attend more often, they serve more, they invite more, they give more, and they grow more. And I could give you anecdotes for all of that, but if you go back to Robert Wuthenau's research at Princeton, you go back to Ed Stetzer and Eric Geiger's book, Transformational Groups. If you look at the 2020 megachurch survey, which I know we're not talking about megachurches, but you see trends that, just anecdotally from that last survey, people that are in groups give 11% more than people who aren't in groups because they feel cared for, they feel like they have a place. They feel like, that part of, we're going to go where everybody knows your name, where they know your stuff, they know you, and you could be known and you could be accepted. But we also see other things happening with groups where people will invite their friends and their neighbors and their coworkers and people that have never darkened the door of your church to come and be a part of a group. They meet the pastor maybe through a video curriculum, which can be as simple as shooting it on an iPhone and uploading it to YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, well, this guy seems okay. And so then they'll go check out your church. So there's some very interesting things that happen with groups. The main thing with groups is, that idea of making disciples. So groups are one vehicle to make disciples. You could do, one-on-one discipleship. You could do triads. You could do a variety of things, but something outside of the worship service, because sitting in rows, you're not, you're doing part of it. You're delivering content, but that place of, where the rubber meets the road of how do I live this out? And, in an event, we can, catalyze a commitment. I want to change. I want to do better. I want this area of my life to grow. But the work of making that happen occurs in a group. Mm-hmm. And so I think events partnered with a group. So even something as simple as you take the sermon that pastors have worked so hard on the weekend, and you provide some discussion questions for people to get together and talk about. Now, they're not going to talk about what it means, because nobody is going to top what the pastor had to say on Sunday. Mm-hmm. But they're going to talk about, what does this mean to me? Where does this hit me? What am I motivated to do? What and then the group is there to support those steps, provide a little bit of accountability, not heavy-handed, not legalistic, but accountability in the sense of, well, last meeting you set a goal for yourself. So how did that go this week? Mm-hmm. And at least knowing somebody's going to ask the question, then you're gonna get with it. Now I've given, we could unpack any of that. There's a lot to it. The other thing that I find, and this is kind of crazy to think about, but in the last 18 years, I've coached, in addition to serving churches, I've coached over 1,500 churches across North America.
Wow.
Various sizes. That's not a brag, that's a wow. But so I've got to play in a lot of people's sandboxes. Mm-hmm. And what I've discovered in all of that, and my approach to a church is, I want to evaluate everything that's working, and everything that's working, we keep. So Sunday school is working, keep Sunday school. ABFs are working, keep ABFs. Midweek Bible study is working, keep midweek Bible study. But then in that church, who are those things not working for? Mm. And so if you have maybe half of your church or a third of your church, involved in one of those things, it may be even in a kind of small group that you introduce. Then you have to ask yourself, the other 50%, the other 70%, why did they say no to that? And what could we offer them that they might say yes to? Because the reality is, there's no silver bullet for a church. Mm-hmm. No silver bullet at all. Our church in California, we got to a place where we had, this is crazy, 125% of our average adult attendance connected into groups.
Wow.
And we started groups.
How do you get 125%?
Well, I think what we know is not everybody attends every Sunday.
Gotcha.
Is one. And the other is, we had a fair number of people that had never darkened the door of our church that were in a group because a friend or a coworker had invited them to join.
Oh, okay.
Gotcha.
But in that, we actually started groups in one of 5 different ways. And somebody asked me one time, they said, well, wouldn't your people be confused if they started their groups in all of these different ways? I said, no, because they only started their group in one of those ways. The only potential confusion was mine, and nobody really cared about that. Mm-hmm. So there's not one thing that's going to get 100% of your people into groups, or 100% of your people, in some kind of an intentional discipleship pathway. So some things are going to work for some people, and you can persist. You can advertise that more and maybe get a few more. You could make people feel bad and feel guilty about not participating. I remember growing up, the pathway to heaven was Sunday school, Sunday morning worship, Sunday night worship, midweek. And if you hit all 4 of those, you were good. If you only hit 1 or 2 of those, it was questionable. Should the Lord come back and you weren't in the Wednesday night service, God forbid. But some of those things work for some people, but they don't work for everybody. So the thing we have to ask ourselves is, where are people finding community? Mm-hmm. Are they finding community in the office? Are they finding community, on the side of sidelines of a soccer field? Are they finding community online in a video game? Wherever they're finding community, how can we equip our people to do something about their intentionally about their spiritual growth and help other people?
Wow.
I think it's interesting. So it seems as if the way that like the groups that you've started operate is that you don't really have to be at the church first and then get in a small group. You can get in a group and then maybe get involved in the church,
Right.
which I think is really interesting. That's not something I've heard very often, that can come first before the church.
And part of it going toward, trends right now is if people weren't going to visit your church before March 12th of 2020,
Mm-hmm.
they're certainly not going to visit your church now and risk catching a disease.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So how are people visiting churches? Well, some of them are viewing online services. And some of them, that's kind of the new front door of the church is online. The new side door of the church is kind of the old side door of the church. And that is a small group.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I think the other thing too is, I'll be careful how I say this because I don't want to stir up stuff. I have the spiritual gift of stirring it up, so I'll be careful.
Well, we never do that here on the.
But I think that in a lot of sectors, the church has kind of been branded with a certain reputation that not all of us would reflect. And so people kind of have a thought about churches being a certain way politically or attitudinally or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that more than ever, it's not just a matter of come to church, it's a matter of get to know me, see Jesus in me, see what it means to be loved by God, see what it means to be unconditionally accepted. Let me show you the attractiveness of what it means to be a Christian instead of all those radical things that you've heard out there that you're afraid that my church might stand for.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really is that personal piece. People are into spiritual things.
Mm-hmm.
They're just not, they're just not necessarily into church per se. And lately I've been saying, Jesus is still the answer. It's just the questions have changed.
Oh, and even how people perceive their own problems. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, and I think this really relates to the small and the mid-sized church. Why is it that so many churches either can't get groups to keep going if they do launch it, or won't even go there? What has been, you've done enough of this to where your research would be your experience. But why is it that sometimes it's so hard for them to get that to take root?
Well, the key of a small group is a leader. Years ago,
the actual small group leader or the leader
small
of the church?
group, having small group leaders. If you don't have small group leaders, you don't have a group.
Okay.
And so years ago, I was handing off children's ministry to our church. It was 80, when a group of 85 to 1,512 years, when it was 85, I did almost everything. As it got larger, I could hand things off. Mm-hmm. So I was handing things off to a new children's pastor. And I told him, I said, there's two parts to children's ministry. He said, okay. I said, recruiting the leaders and keeping them happy. And he said, well, when do I get to work with the kids? And I said, well, you weren't listening.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with groups.
Yeah.
Is that you have to have leaders. Now, the smaller your church is, the more you have to have a sure thing. Mm. Because if I'm in a large church, if I'm in a mega church and I do something foolish and I lose 12 people, I lose 100 people, I lose 1,000 people, I'm going to live to tell about it. Mm-hmm. But in smaller to medium-sized churches, I don't have a church anymore.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So part of it is I have to carefully pick and mentor people that I can believe I can trust with, if you're a church of 100 and your groups have 10 people, I can entrust you with 1/10 of my church. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
And so I have to know that I can trust you. So sometimes we get caught in, well, I do a Bible study, we have a Sunday school class, we have a midweek, most of the people come to that. Mm-hmm. So I think we're good and we're kind of satisfied with what we've done. Sometimes there is a fear of releasing other people, But I think that we just have to get to know people a little bit better. Because let's face it, every pastor listening to this, at some point in your life, somebody saw something in you and somebody believed in you and supported you in getting a start. And you would not be where you are today if it wasn't for that person. So who are those people that you can begin to invest in and multiply? So if you're in a small church, the first thing that I would do is I would find 6 or 8 people that you think might have potential to lead a group. And I would meet with them every week for a year and invest in them. And
what does a potential leader look like? I mean, what kind of characteristics would you try to identify?
Well, I think that you would find somebody that has, has good character. Nobody's perfect. You're not going to find Jesus Jr.
Right.
But somebody who has good character, somebody who is teachable.
Okay.
And somebody who is kind of warm-hearted and is available to other people. I don't necessarily look for a great deal of knowledge, because in a good small group, you don't want the leader teaching, right?
Right.
And so you'll give them either a video or you'll give them a curriculum to follow, but they don't have to be necessarily extensively knowledgeable, and they don't have to have a lot of experience or skills, because you can help them develop experience and skills. So if they have good character, if they don't have good character, there's really not much that you can do with them. So if they have good character, they're warm-hearted, they're teachable, then you're good. And spend some time with them, get to know them, mentor them, disciple them. Even something as simple as, starting with a Sermon on the Mount and use the Discovery Bible Study method, which you can Google, and it's 9 questions. It's the same 9 questions out of every passage of Scripture. And I had a pastor that in ministry for 25 years, started doing this with a group of 8 guys that were under 40, said it was the best thing he's done in years. And so you spend some time building into them, and then basically what you've built into them, what you've given them, then say, now I want you to go and start your circle. And begin to do the same thing with them. Now, if you do the math, it's never perfect math, but if you do the math in the first year, if you have 8 and those 8 go and get 8, then you have 64. And if those 64 go in and get 8, well, then you have 512. And of course, there's always going to be some that'll be like, well, I just want to stay in the pastor's group. Well, you let them know it's a year, and then, kicking you out of the house. But that's part of it, is who do you trust? The other thing is, and I got this quote from John Maxwell years ago. He said, if there's somebody that can do the same thing you do 30% as well as you can, then let them do it. And chances are they can probably do it 60% as well as you can. So if there's somebody that you say, well, they could lead a group 30% as well as I could, well, invite them in and see, what they have. Now, if your church is a little bit larger, then, we do alignment series, church-wide campaigns. You can either purchase curriculum, create curriculum. I mean, the granddaddy of them all is the 40 Days of Purpose, which is 20 years old this year. It's kind of hard to believe. But, I've started in some churches, we've started dozens of groups. Some churches, we've started hundreds of groups. But the idea is to begin to look at your people as potential leaders. How are they gifted to serve? And this won't be for everybody, but, I pastor in East Texas. Their town is 500. Their church on Sunday is 500.
Wow.
And he said, well, we have more groups. We have more people in groups now than we have on Sunday. But he said, there's one group, I don't know if we can count it. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, this gal works at a nursing home, and she started a group at the nursing home, and she has 30 residents of the nursing home in her group. But they don't go to our church, so are we supposed to count them? I said, here's what you need to do. I said, you need to go back and get 499 more leaders that'll go do exactly that same thing. To reach out, to make a difference, to connect with people that they know. And so even talking to my pastor locally, the church I attend because I sit with my dad, and the pastor's a good-hearted man. He doesn't have a big ego. He's not building a platform, which is kind of refreshing.
Yeah.
But anyway, he has 50 people in his church. And he says, well, we have one small group that meets on Wednesday night. And he's got a dozen people in that one small group on Wednesday night. And I look at his 50 people, and I'm like, Yeah, I didn't tell him this because he's not ready for it. But I said, if you got 50 people, then you have the potential for 50 groups.
Mm.
They say, well, we don't need 50 groups. You don't? Because I think there's a lot of people that need to know about the truth of God's word. There's a lot of people that need to be introduced to Jesus. Number one study, selling at Zondervan. Actually, there's 4 studies and they all follow the same thing. Number one theme at Zondervan right now all has to do with worry and anxiety.
About what people are going through.
And so you tell your congregation, okay, we're going to start a group. We want you to gather some people anybody that you know that's worried about anything, anybody that you know that's anxious right now, which is pretty much everybody that everybody knows, right?
Right.
Invite them to do this Bible study with you and learn what God's word has to say about worry and anxiety and how to find hope, how to find peace, how to have faith, And so, there's a lot of things that we can do, but it's a matter of what am I willing to release and who am I willing to develop? And sometimes we think, especially if, you're a solo pastor in a church, you're doing everything, that, well, I'll just do it myself. It's hard to say, well, I'm going to step back and teach somebody else to do this. But if you're not, the goal is really to work yourself out of a job, so to speak. So how do you find those people that have potential, and how do you equip them so that they can serve and you can begin to grow?
Alan,
And
why do pastors not do that? Why do we not release ministry to people? And again, this is in the small church setting typically. What do you find that the reason is we don't raise up leaders?
All right. So I'm going to say a hard thing, but I'm going to say it with love.
Okay. I feel the love.
Okay. Sometimes we're like Moses in Exodus 18. I'm the only one that can do it, and the people like coming to me. So we can be a little codependent on our church. It makes us feel important. It makes us feel needed. That's not a bad thing to feel, but if it's preventing us from releasing other people, sometimes we don't know where to start. Sometimes we have trouble seeing potential in our own congregation because we're like, well, that guy's a know-it-all and that guy's a knucklehead. And, I don't want to, give them anything because they're just going to cause more trouble for me. And so, we can begin to do that. But I mean, look at the knuckleheads that Jesus worked with. And somebody did a study of the Gospels, right? They discovered that Jesus spent 73% of his time with his disciples.
Yep.
They ate together, they served together, he taught them, they prayed together. Well, some of them slept. 73% of his time. And we are talking right now because of those 12 people, well, one replacement, that Jesus invested 73% of his time in 3.5 years. He invested in them. And that's why we're here today. That's why the church is in the world today, because of those. Jesus could draw a crowd. He fed 5,000 men plus women and children. So, I mean, if Jesus wanted a mega church, he could have a mega church. But I don't know that
seems like he led a small group instead, right?
That's right. That's right. So who is it that we can invest in? Who is it that we can mentor? And it doesn't have to be 100 people. It doesn't have to be 8 people. It could be 2 or 3 or 4 that we spend time with, that we give them what we have, and then they give to others what they have. And it's not so far-fetched. And you keep all of the other stuff that you're doing. Now, of course, in this season, anything that you want to start in your church, people say, well, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this new small group thing? And well, we're doing this because of COVID.
Yeah, you blame everything on COVID.
You say, well, wait a minute, that thing we used to do, why aren't we doing that anymore? Well, we had to stop doing that because of COVID.
I've been telling pastors that for 2 years.
Yeah. I had somebody last year, they said, well, we're thinking about discontinuing our midweek Bible study. I said, okay. I said, what are you doing now? Well, we had to stop it because of COVID. I said, is your giving gone down? They said, no. I said, well, it sounds like you've successfully discontinued your midweek Bible study and it didn't hurt you. So just don't bring it back. They brought it back in a way, but anyway.
I have a question. So we host a small group at our house.
Okay.
Through our church. And, I love it. And, I think that's what God's called us to do right now in this season of our life for sure. But it feels like a sacrifice sometimes, just going to be honest. It's hard, and I'm just kind of wondering, like, how do you equip your leaders to say, hey, listen, this is not always going to be put some chips and salsa out and have everybody at your house. It can get kind of difficult. How do you handle that and, kind of foster that sense of ownership with your small group leaders?
Well, first of all, you're not supposed to talk about things like this on a podcast.
Oh, sorry.
It hurts guys like me. I'm kidding. So when you say,
great question, Carolee. Good job.
So Carolee, when you say it feels like a sacrifice, what exactly feels that way?
Well, first of all, I think that Satan really tries to get into good things that are happening. I really do.
Absolutely.
So like we have our small group on Wednesdays and it never fails. Everybody's melting down at my house. I have a 3 and a 6-year-old. Something is going to go wrong, it just, I don't know. So I think that's the first thing. And then, I think second, it's an extra responsibility for us right now in a season of our lives where we feel a little stretched thin. And it's a worthwhile one, but we have to, our church that thankfully is really good about providing us with coaching and encouragement and things like that. But I mean, just like anything else that's worthwhile, it takes energy and it takes time.
It does. No, you're right. And thanks for sharing about that. Years ago, I was listening to a speaker and he was saying how in his house, that if there was any time that he and his wife were ever going to fight, it was always right before the small group came over. And I sat there and I thought, oh, thank God we're not the only ones. Because a lot of people don't realize that. And so I have a friend who's a Presbyterian pastor up in Baltimore. And he said, anytime you get into anything that's worthwhile, you're going to encounter a certain amount of spiritual flack. And so there is kind of that part of, you have to have the room prepared, you got to be studied up, but you got to be prayed up, and you've got to know, expect, okay, stuff's going to happen, because you know what, we have an enemy that's completely against what we're doing. And he has one full-time job, and that's to steal and to kill and to destroy. That's his full-time job, and he does it pretty well. So we have to be aware of all of that. The other part of it is we just, there is that part of being weary and well-doing. And we just, it just kind of drags on you, or, people don't seem to be as appreciative, or you're just like, why are we doing this? It just, but here's the other thing. Someday I'm going to write a book, and you'll understand this being in Greenville. But my book is going to be called The Lazy Man's Guide to Leadership. And the premise of the book is give away everything you could possibly give away for somebody else to do it. So if you're like, you know what, why am I cleaning my house every week? Why am I preparing the lesson? Why am I providing the childcare? Why am I providing the refreshments? Stop.
Okay.
And so what happens is, this is the approach that doesn't work. If you go to your group and you say, would anyone like to? And they'll say, oh, well, we need to pray about it. And then they'll come back and they'll say, we've sought the Lord, and what the Lord has shared with us is that the Lord wants us to remain comfortable and wants you to do all of it. That doesn't work. So what does work is you say, okay, we're going to change it up a little bit, and everybody's going to do something. So we're going to put out a sign-up sheet, just like you put a sign-up sheet for, snacks for soccer or for school or whatever. And so here's the calendar. Here's the next 6 weeks. Who's going to bring refreshments? Who's going to have the group in their house? Who's going to lead the discussion?
Wow.
So I did this with the men's group. We used to meet in restaurants up and down Woodruff Road for 4 years. Every month we changed restaurants, unless it was particularly bad, and then we changed the next week. So up and down. So the place was provided. We met at lunchtime as a men's group. The food was provided. But what I would do is I would say, okay, here's the deal. I said, today is the first and only day that I'm going to lead a lesson from this study. So we're going to pass around a sheet. Everybody's going to sign up to take a turn leading. And I knew that it worked.
Okay.
I remember it being at Five Guys over by the mall back when it was over by the mall.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the guy sitting across the table from me is exactly half my age. And he's leading the discussion from a book that I wrote.
That's
And he's
great.
doing a brilliant job. The only problem was the guys at the end of the table kept making fun of my questions. And I was like, hey, I'm sitting right here. But that thing of you say, listen, we love you, we love our group, and we love you so much. We want you to, take part in this. It does a couple of things. One is it changes the feeling from this being your group to being our group,
Mm-hmm.
as I'm taking responsibility. I always jokingly say that person in your group that is kind of flaky and you're never sure if they're going to show up, just move the group to their house,
Great idea.
because then they have to show up. But the other thing that you do in that by changing around leadership is you're also seeing who has the potential to actually lead their own group at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you don't know it until you've actually seen them in action. So I would say, it's kind of like Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, when Tom Sawyer, got the other kids to paint the fence for him. So get your group to do all the work for you.
Okay.
The thing is, you can't charge them. That's where that analogy stops. You can't charge them to do the group work.
Unfortunately,
I know
right?
her group is going to be so much better now because of all that advice. That's
Well,
pretty
and I
cool.
don't want to shed a negative light. I mean, I love our people so very
That's
very
not
much.
negative. That's honesty. That's why most groups don't make it. And especially when you have people, like in your case, where you got a 3 and a 6-year-old, and you are trying to step up and you are trying to do things. And sometimes, and you being wired the way you are, you everything's going to be perfect. And
Dale, don't call me out like that.
That affects a lot of this, because a lot of people are that way. But the whole purpose of the groups is for us to be transparent and to be real, and
That's right.
then go
That's right.
to Alan's example of Jesus hanging with the disciples, the whole thing. So I think that was great advice, Alan. We appreciate you doing that. As we kind of move toward the end of the podcast, I did want to ask you this question. Do you find that it's potentially easier today to do groups in this pandemic related 2-year period we've been in, or harder?
Yes and no. I mean, part of it depends on, people's attitude toward the coronavirus, toward the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes groups are easier. Some people will meet in a group and they won't attend an in-person worship service, because maybe they know the people in their group are kind of taking the same approach that they are, have the same attitudes that they do.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in a public worship service, you don't know who's going to cough on you or, whatever else. So they'll do that. Some people are, they're open to doing a group online. Now, an online group is very different than an in-person group, but I think it has its place. So there is some reluctance. And again, it depends on kind of where people are at and how much cable news they watch and, all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I won't get into that.
Yeah.
Even though I do the spiritual gift, it's bring it up. But I think that, this idea of the church being decentralized is the hardest learning we've had in the pandemic, that the church can gather online, the church can, you can receive content online, people are visiting online. But this idea of, okay, if we can't meet together in the same room at the same time, or if people are reluctant to do that, then we can find other ways for them to meet. And yet we also see that people that are far from God will participate in things online because they can watch without anybody watching them. This isn't new. Acts 1:8, Jesus's last words to his disciples were, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the earth. The fulfillment of Acts 1:8 is Acts 8:1. Persecution hit the church in Jerusalem, and all but the apostles went to where? Judea and Samaria. So it took persecution to motivate the church to go outside of Jerusalem. So our churches have been dispersed.
Mm-hmm.
Some of our people are not coming back. Some of our people, they looked around the internet and they found something that was more entertaining. So we lost a lot of our consumers.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the good news. The people that are in your church right now, they're with you.
Yep.
They're serving, they're giving, they are with you. Just like that, those 85 people that were left at our church in California, I mourned the loss of over 2/3 of our church leaving. I mean, I carried the grief as if they'd gone on a trip somewhere and the bus had gone off. So here's kind of my admonition to pastors, is you have to lead the church that you have and stop trying to lead the church that you lost.
That's so good.
Because 2019 isn't coming back. We got to move forward, but the people that you have are with you. And if you've always wanted to change something, now is the time, because these people that you have fought the war with you. And so you want to carefully lead change. You always want to carefully lead change, but there's not much that you can do outside of something that's immoral or illegal. There's not much that you can do that's going to scare them off at this point, because if they weren't scared off in the last 2 years, they are with you.
That's
and
right.
they are with you. So move forward and try something new, or change the culture of your church. Again, do that carefully, talk to people about it, talk about the reasons, get their feelings about stuff. Go back and read John Cotter's book, Leading Change. I don't know why that book ever got lost, because I see a lot of people doing stupid things, saying, hey, I went to a conference and this is what we're going to do now. And it's like, oh, good grief. I had a pastor come up to me in Texas. He says, I know exactly what I'm going to do after a half-day seminar in small groups. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back home. I'm going to shut down Sunday school. I'm going to put everybody in groups. I said, I know what your spiritual gift is. He said, what do you think my spiritual gift is? I said, sir, you have the gift of martyrdom. And I go, oh, what do you think I should do? I said, well, leave Sunday school alone, but then who attends your worship service that's not in Sunday school? See if they would maybe join a small group, and then go about it that way.
It's got to be mission and vision driven. You can't just go start small groups because we had you on the podcast.
No,
it's got to be something that's in your mission and vision. But the flip side of what I just said is it ought to be in your mission and vision, because we need to be giving ministry away. We need to be raising up disciples, and we talk about discipleship. We just don't do it. And we have such an easy tool to do that with groups. And one of the things we've talked about for the last couple of years is affinity groups, where you get people together on things that they just enjoy doing. And it's not always spiritual, but honestly, it is. And so it's got to be vision and mission driven. Man, there's so much more we could talk about today, but we try to keep the podcast under 3 hours. So as we kind of go to wrap this thing up, you've got hundreds of small church leaders listening today. If you were sitting with them today over coffee, what's one word of advice or wisdom, maybe something from your experience that you would share with them today if you just had a moment to talk to them?
Yeah. What I would say right now is, given what's happened the last 2 years, is that your calling is as valid today as it was 2 years ago, as it was 10 years ago. And follow what God's called you to do. Everybody has seen things that they've worked hard to build that have some people it's fallen apart. Some people it's just, somebody posted the other day, they said being a pastor is kind of like, having regular, breakups in your life, regularly being dumped is kind of how it feels. Stay true to what God's called you to. And then also in that, don't be afraid to try new things. I mean, don't try new things in a reckless way, but don't be afraid to try new things. I mean, it's a new day, and we've got to put new wine into new wineskins. And what has worked for us in the past is not going to work for us as well going forward. And that's the tension that we're feeling right now, because we're used to doing things a certain way. I mean, the attractional church was already fading away. What worked, back in the 80s and 90s, if we build it, they will come. And then COVID hit and they all left, right? That's kind of how it feels. But I would say hang in there, consider, what to add, what to change, do it gradually, get buy-in. But don't be afraid to change. Some people are afraid to do anything different right now because I've lost so many people, I can't afford to lose anybody else. Well, as long as you're not introducing change in a reckless way, the people that you have are with you. Just like that 85 that we had 30 years ago, They had fought the battle with us. They weren't there because they were for the former pastor or against the former pastor. They were there because they were for the church. And when we began to cast vision, we began to gradually bring some things in. Then we could build on it, and they were with us. And it was almost to the point of, what do we got to lose? But your people are with you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for being on here, Alan. It was good information for me, at least, going forward as a small group host.
That's right.
Leader.
The Lazy Leader's Guide to Groups. That's what you need to practice.
I will buy that book.
I'm just telling you right now, bro, you need to put that book out right now.
That's right.
Not just groups, that's pastors too,
Yeah.
Thank you again. Yeah, go ahead.
Say people in the North, when I say lazy, they say I'm being judgmental.
Yeah,
said, well, you don't.
Well, I found people are going to criticize you no matter what you do, so you might as well do the right thing. And
there you go.
And so, thank you for being with us. I know we're going to connect with you again over the years ahead and work together, because we have, our mission at 95 Network is we want to connect small and mid-sized churches to health building resources, which is and so connecting with you is awesome to do that. And then our vision is to bring healthy change to every church in America. And so it's a big vision, If someone wanted to connect with you, wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that right now?
Yeah, they can just go to allenwhite.org. So Allen is ALLEN, then white like the color, .org. There's the .com, but that's not me.
That's not you. I checked.
Go to .org. .com's a graphic artist down in Charleston. I said, if you ever want to give that up. So somebody said, I went to your website. It looks kind of weird. So just allenwhite.org.
So did I. Well, thank you so much again for being with us and for taking the time to share with us. We've gotten so much on this, and we really appreciate you.
Hey, you're welcome. Anytime.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.